We'll jump into today's episode right after this announcement. For over 13 years, something remarkable has been happening. Rural hospitals and other small healthcare organizations that have partnered with Capstone have been achieving results and forming workplace cultures that even we are blown away by. It is truly a game changer when rural hospitals are the provider of choice and employer of choice so they can keep care local and margins strong. Far more healthcare organizations need to experience what's possible. That's why we're stepping forward in a bigger way, expanding our team of experts, expanding our capabilities by adding a strategic planning division to expand our ability to help even more rural hospitals and other healthcare organizations in 2026 and beyond. Capstone will continue to be the partner that small healthcare organizations can count on to meet them where they're at and guide them towards a stronger future. You can learn more at capstoneleadership.net. Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. It is me, Sue Tetzlaff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions and the host of Culture Change RX. Today is one of those weekly episodes where I have a guest in the studio, and it is Greg, and we're going to start with having him introduce himself, and then we're going to get into a conversation that I think, in particular, we kind of wanted it to be for nurses and nurse leaders, but honestly, I know that what we're going to talk about is valuable for anyone. So with that little bit of an introduction and teaser, I'm going to hand it over to Greg to introduce himself. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Sue. Great to be back in the studio with you today. I am currently the Chief Operating Officer for Highland Medical Staffing. We're a small nurse-led, nurse-founded medical staffing company, primarily focus on nurse placement in the critical access world in Iowa. So we support small rural healthcare organizations, help with daily staffing. We also have an arm that helps with mobile vascular service. So we do PICC placements and their bedside PICC placements, ultrasound guided IVs. We also help staff with providers in a locum situation as well. So that's kind of my full-time day job. I also am serving currently as the executive director for the Iowa Nurses Association. That just started here back the first of the year. So that's been a lot of fun to help with that program as well. And then just prior to starting that, joined the Capstone team as a transformational expert. So really enjoy that work with nursing leaders and nursing executives, just to be able to give back to what was provided to me through my tenure has been wonderful. And then prior to that was the chief nursing officer at a critical access hospital in central Iowa for almost 10 years. So that's kind of a little snapshot of me today.
That's where
that is where we
Greg.
met, way back in Galena.
Yeah. Yep. You attended one of our Capstone Leadership Summits there in Galena. And that's been 14 years. I don't even know how many of those 2-day in-person summits we've done, but there's certain people that just stand out in audiences and you become like friends for life. And you were one of those people, Greg. And it's been nice to have met you there. And now you're on our team helping out too. So I know that recently you mentioned that there was a recent event through IONL that you mentioned that you attended. And as usual, when you attend things like that, there are certain things that just stand out, and make you ponder and think. And you almost in some way want to not only use them for yourself, but pay them forward a bit. And this is a great forum for doing that. So I think that's where we'll start the conversation, Greg, is you attended this event and you've got some things to share.
Yes. So last week attended the Iowa Organization for Nursing Leadership annual conference. We call it our spring conference that we hold, and I happen to sit on the board of directors for the IONL and serve as this year's secretary. So we actually bring together a few different membership groups through the Iowa Hospital Association. So we have our nurse leader group, and then we have our trauma coordinators and emergency preparedness coordinators, as well as behavioral health professionals, and all of us, and then the quality folks come in as well. So we have those four specialty groups, and this is our second or third year that we've brought everyone together. And it's just been very, very meaningful to have connection together, time to network together. But then we also have individualized tracks, and that's been incredibly helpful and supportive to all of our respective roles. And this year was nothing out of the ordinary for takeaways. We definitely had some strong speakers, but a couple things really stood out this year with some of the speakers. And the two things that continue to resonate in my mind are the power of the pause and staying grounded in your why. And from a leadership perspective, it just really resonated and ironically did make me pause and really think about, why was I sitting in that ballroom, that random Wednesday afternoon surrounded by nearly 300 nursing leaders, and why did we take the time to come sit there today and listen to the speakers? And history shows that the content and the takeaways are stellar, and this year was no exception by any means, but just hit it in a little different direction this year. And so I'm excited to share and reflect on that a little bit, and really do believe, as you mentioned before, that the nuggets that come out of today are not exclusive to nursing leaders in any way. It really is about who we are as humans and how we can stay grounded in what we do every day.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit offline before this about how when we became nurses, we're both registered nurses, and how when we became nurses, that there's a reason why you choose whatever profession you choose. And oftentimes when you're tugged to an area like nursing, there's really some big whys, or at least one big why wrapped around that. But I think the same is true when it comes to moving into management, to leadership, is that sometimes that's a little different why. Maybe it's the same, but just another way to live that out. But when the days get hard, and they do, whether you're a staff nurse or whatever your job is, whether you're a leader or not, when the days get hard, that why probably matters more than anything to grab onto. And I don't know if that's where your mind goes about this, but what's your thinking about that, Greg?
Yes, it definitely does go there too, both to why I became a nurse, but then what ultimately made me decide to go into leadership. When I think back to my why, I knew I always wanted to do something in medicine. Kind of didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and ultimately decided like nursing might be the option for me. And before enrolling in nursing school, had to take some prereqs and got to be a CNA overnight and go to school during the day. And there was a 3-day span where I took care of a patient who was at her end of life post hip fracture, and just really got to know the family specifically, because the patient was incoherent and just really not alert enough to be able to forge a relationship with her. But the family is something that's where I felt like I could support them in this difficult time. And that was as the CNA. And so I knew I had a little more time than what the nurses may have based on their responsibilities. And it was a very natural progression. It was a very natural thing. And as time wore on over the next few days, she did end up passing away shortly after we got her to a facility. And I was able to attend her funeral and stay in touch with the family. That was back in almost 20 years ago, 16, wow, 17 years ago. And we still exchange Christmas cards. We still exchange random, occasional emails. And immediately when I left the funeral home that many couple decades ago, it just solidified for me, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Like seeing those 72 hours that I got to work with that patient was just awesome. It was such a privilege to help them process through such a difficult time. And in the same token, leadership wise, on that same unit, was unfortunately had a relatively negative interaction with my direct supervisor. There was a patient complaint, and I was mistaken for a male nurse as opposed to being the male CNA, and was accused of practicing outside my scope and adjusting different
Mm.
levels of oxygen and touching IV pumps and all that stuff. And I very well knew that I was not to mess around with that stuff, but really went to bat for myself, but also asked a couple charge nurse to step up and speak on my behalf. And ultimately we were able to get through it, but I was never really able to share my side of the story. And my supervisor just, because the patient's family said it happened, it was me, and there was no questions asked. I really didn't get to defend myself, if you will. So it was kind of in that moment I'd thought about leading people. Like, I was always looking at the unit like, oh, how could we make this a little better? What could we do to help people? And so I feel like I was naturally inclined to see things from a different lens, perhaps. And it was in that moment that I had that negative interaction with my direct supervisor at the time that really reinforced to me that leadership is where I wanted to be, and
Mhm.
that I could use that negative experience and anchor me into not allowing me to be a leader that does not listen to and discuss with staff members when things may go awry, because we know that they will go awry and we will have to address them whenever it happens.
Mm. It's interesting that your stories that you just shared, that the story and that led to your why of becoming a nurse was really a positive patient encounter, family encounter, and that for leadership it was somewhat of a negative encounter that led to you, I can do it better than that. I want to do it better than that. I don't want that to happen to anyone else. And so a why can be sparked out, I guess, good or bad. And I think you were sharing a story with me that overcoming adversity, that one of the speakers at your recent conference, that was kind of the message she shared, was that our mindset, our perspective, and how we overcome adversity and use it for good. Sounds like you use that adversity really to do some great things in nursing leadership and otherwise moving forward.
Yes, and I definitely did not take a traditional trajectory to leadership. I went from staff nurse to senior leader executive nurse overnight, literally. But it was because of, I think, my forethought and desire to make a difference. And while I was a young nurse, I knew my limits, and I knew that I didn't know everything, but I was willing to learn. And I knew that my learning curve had to be incredibly steep and it had to be really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was willing to be vulnerable in front of the staff from day one and say, I know that we're not going to beat around the bush. My age is not something that's working to my benefit for this role. But just because I'm a young nurse does not mean that I can't be a great leader. And
Mm-hmm.
so together we're going to do this, and we're going to give each other grace, and we're going to give each other room to grow, but we're going to figure this out together. And you look at from day one to when I left almost 10 years later, the culture that we had developed and the difficulties that we had encountered were numerous. But I think as we were talking offline, I think the day that really changed everything for the best was, it was in the first 6 months of my time, and we were having our monthly staff meetings, and it was just time for them to get to know me to get to know them in a less formal setting. And so I started and shared just what I shared today, my why, and encouraged everyone around the room to do the same. And they knew that coming into the meeting that we were going to do this, and that was just going to be the topic. But we held the meeting, actually, normally it would have only been 2 times, but I actually held it 4 times because I wanted to ensure that we would have ample opportunity for people to attend. And so what normally would have been a 30 to 45-minute staff meeting, it ended up being over an hour both time, all 4 times. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I will treasure forever, because that was a moment where I think staff really realized, wow, this guy is not just here, as a stepping stone. This guy is committed. This guy is here for the right reasons and wants to get to know who we are and make this organization and this unit, this unit and department better. And so I look at that, and when I talk about anchoring in the why and the power of the pause, those 4 1-hour increments were a true pause, but we anchored ourselves in why we do what we do, because every day we are inundated with things to make us angry and upset or frustrated, or maybe not treated well by patients or fellow staff members. But it's not what happens to us, it's how we respond, because we know we're going to encounter those things. But it's all about our mindset. And to your point, Sue, that was one of the other speakers' content, was around her mindset when she was in a tragic accident and had to relearn to walk and talk. And it was a very rough course of time for her. And it just really reinforced the pausing and helping understand, why do we do what we do? And she shared that in the first 48 hours in the hospital post-accident, that she had a nurse come in the room, put her hand on her shoulder and say, I know you're upset. I know this is really hard right now, but we're going to get through this together. This is not going to be easy, and there is going to be pain, but we will get through this together. And I think what really stood out to me is how she said that it was one of the first times someone on the medical team acknowledged her pain, acknowledged her trauma, and acknowledged the fact that what she was going through was really hard. And no one could, say they'd been there before. So I think that was really powerful for me to just think back. We can all think about certain patient encounters, or even outside the hospital, family encounters, or any sort of circumstance. You can think about the perspective. And then she talked about being in rehab, and she was, I believe she said she was in her late 20s, early 30s when this happened. And she went to rehab, and there was someone, I think she said it was someone 10 or 11 years old, and had been in a horrific accident and was, learning to do the same thing she was. But she said, I don't have to be a child going through this. I'm an adult and have the support of my spouse. And that's the perspective component that she continued to reference. And so I think when I think about that, the closing keynote coupled with this presentation, it just really reinforced the why do we do what we do? And we really have to anchor ourselves in that, because the days are long and the days are hard. And especially in leadership, it's lonely. We have a network of people, but it gets really lonely when we are the ones grinding it out and doing the work as nurse leaders and executives. And it's really just hard to keep going sometimes. But when we anchor ourselves in why we do what we do, it helps reinforce and remind us that we're here for a purpose, on purpose. And that's what's really important to keep in mind.
I'm getting ready to go on site with one of our partners next week and do some leadership training a couple days there. And we're circling back to leadership practices that in this organization in particular, they're very familiar with. They've been gaining competency and consistency with for years now, just like nurses would, right? In their specialty, they learn the practices of nursing, the process of nursing, and they just perfect it over time on that continuum of novice to expert. Leadership really isn't that much difference. But one of the things that we're going to be talking about as we circle back again to something that they're very familiar with, and you think, why do we have to keep learning to get better and better at some of these things, is really to get better results, right? Like, these things get great results. And if we get better at them, they'll get even better and more consistent results. But one of the things that I'm actually going to be focused on, which is really interesting, is really lines up with what we're talking about today, is that, we have to be very intentional about these practices. And if we don't connect to the why of each of these practices, it can become very transactional, check the box. You're just going through the motions. See, you can do that clinically, right? You can do that in leadership. Yep. We can all just simply go through the motions. But one of the things we're going to be talking about is like re-looking at these practices. Let's say it's rounding with our employees. And before we enter that encounter, is really taking that pause and setting our intent and connecting to the why of that practice and the outcome. In fact, with this organization that I'll be on site with, one of their major goals and intent in the people pillar is to create an organization of belonging. And so we're going to talk about the intent of each one of these things, not just being rounding to round and, something to check off our to-do list as leaders, but to do it and pause before we do it, remember why we do it. And there's a whole handful of whys and importance to it and benefits to it. But in particular, really connect with the intent of belonging and creating belonging through these encounters. And if you think of nursing, every single one of our encounters with a patient, whether it's for an intervention, a dressing change, starting an IV, or doing hourly rounding or bedside shift report, all of these things can become very transactional if we sometimes just gut through and maybe don't pause or connect it to the why. We start to lose the heart of it and maybe the meaning behind it all. And that might be part of the whole trail to stress and burnout too. I don't know. I think the farther away you get from your why.
Yep. And there's two things as you were saying that, Sue. One of them actually put the entire room out of their comfort zone. Well, I'm generalizing here when I say this, but there was a screen or a slide she put on the screen, and she said, I want everyone to take their phones out. I want everyone to take a picture of it. And I want you to send this to the first person that pops into your head that would give you honest feedback. She goes, because as leaders, we don't always get great feedback. We usually get the negative feedback, or we get the stuff that weighs us down rather than lifts us up. And so in the room, it says on the screen, it says, I'm in a training for work. Can you help me out? What qualities do I bring into a room? And then when I show up, what else does? And she said, I'm going to ask for people to share out. And there were a handful of people that got responses, and they stood up and read what their person said back to them. And, there were people getting choked up, and it all brought us back to fill your cup when you're feeling low. Like, find things that are going to fill your cup and seek that out. And that was really, really cool to get that opportunity. And it was something that I don't think anyone in that room would have done outside of being ordered to do so, if you will. And I think the result was actually probably still being seen today. And most people probably won't even share what the feedback they got was. But that was a really powerful exercise. And when you go to conferences, sometimes those interactive sessions can get a little uncomfortable and awkward, but that was one of those moments where it's like, there's some validity to this, and this really does help for sure. And as I was reflecting on that, it made me think about back to my why, and you were referencing patient rounding and that sort of thing as a leader. Unfortunately, this happened at the end of my time as CNO, so I didn't get to see this through. But one of my questions over the last about probably last couple months was encouraging the patient to ask their nurse their why. Tell them the story about why they became a nurse. Why did you become a CNA? And I said, don't just limit it to the nursing staff. I said, when lab comes in to draw your blood, when housekeeping comes in to clean your room, when food service comes to deliver your tray or pick it up, I said, I don't care who comes in this room. I said, ask them their why. Because, and I prefaced it with this interaction can often become stagnant and transactional, as you referenced before. Mm-hmm. And we're both humans, and let's approach it as such, that there's more to this than just me bringing you your pills and you taking them and telling me what your pain level is. And that's not what this is about. This is about treating you as an entire person. And we can't effectively do that if I can't, as your caregiver, share my why with you. It just brings it to a whole nother level. And there likely is going to be some sort of crossover or overlap in your interests or your stories. And that's going to spark conversation. And it's just going to carry you through for quite some time. So Unfortunately, I can't say that it went well, but knowing the culture that we had built right up until the end of my time at Guthrie, I know that that would have gone over really well in the staff. It would have
Mm-hmm.
just taken us to that next level because we were doing really well. Our quality scores were really well. We had a couple we were at 100% satisfaction in a couple categories on the inpatient side. We were trending upward on the ER side. So I would like to think that that would have just taken it, to that next level. But I do recall as well some of the patients looking at me kind of like, you want me to do what? And
Yeah.
others were like, oh, yeah, this sounds fun. It was almost like granting them permission to make it a personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the reverse can be true too. Like the caregivers, the staff getting to know the patient beyond their diagnosis, and their current care
Yes.
plan for the day and their med list and whatever. And that starts to create a lot of meaning too when you get to know your patients and residents, if it's especially residents nursing home setting. For sure, my dad's in a assisted living center right now, and actually he's one of those people that loves to get to know his staff and the staff get to know him, and you can tell what that does for his experience and theirs too. It's
Yeah.
lovely to watch that. As we're getting ready to wrap up here today, I want to make sure that maybe there was a message or two that maybe we didn't get to yet when you thought about having this time today. And is there anything else before we do our usual end with any sort of maybe promotion or plugs for things of resources or just events coming up that other people may want to know about? But is there anything else about the power of why or the power of the pause that you want to offer up before we close?
The first thing that comes to my head is the opportunity that I get on a monthly basis to volunteer at my kids' school, their elementary. There's a program called Watchdogs, which stands
Mm,
for Dads of Great Students. And it's not restricted to just dads, it's any dad or father figure, dad, grandpa, aunt, or dad, grandpa, uncle, whatever, brother, friend. They just want a male figure in the building from 8 to noon, and we get to go to a few classrooms and eat lunch, go to recess. It's been cup filling for me, and that helps. It helps me pause. It helps me,
mm-hmm.
pause in the moment. And yeah, I know it's on my calendar every month, and I get to spend 4 hours in the school building with them and see them in a different environment, but also get to see that culture. And it then brings me to thinking about the healthcare culture and how so much overlap there is. And so I can't underscore enough about finding that routine pause that is cup filling, that it is not easy, and it often has to be scheduled and on your calendar because we often do live by our
Mm-hmm.
calendars. And that is something that I can't go without. It is something that truly does fill my cup and gives me an opportunity. So I just encourage all the listeners, regardless of your role, regardless of your industry, where you're working, what you're doing, finding that routine opportunity to pause and just anchor yourself in who you are and what you do. And that's the biggest takeaway message that I can think of today.
Yeah, yeah. We can put some information about that too in the show notes for folks that want to learn more about that. That fascinates me. And we love promoting that because it is such a great thing for people like you to make that kind of contribution to young people. And it is reciprocated, isn't it? It's just like you give and
Mhm.
it gives back to you. It's just amazing. I think our
Yeah.
professions do that too, but opportunities like that do as well. So there's a couple of things coming up in our world of Capstone that maybe our audience listening today are a little more, maybe it's more of those clinical nursing people that hung on with us to the end of this conversation here today. But I did want to let folks know that coming up, we'll put more details. This is just kind of a teaser, but we've got a couple nurse specific events coming up later this year. And most of our events and trainings and offerings are for all healthcare leaders, middle managers, executives, clinical, non-clinical. But we're going to be doing some very nursey things later this year. And it is first we're going to do a 1 hour webinar on our 5-step process for nursing excellence. And it'll really be an hour really packed with overviewing a 5-step process for how we structure and organize nursing excellence efforts. So when you were talking about those great results that were happening at your organization, they didn't just happen, right? There were very specific things that the nurses and the leaders together organized themselves around it and very intentionally created some improvement and great results and to great improvement in patient care. So we're going to overview that process, and that's in a webinar in August. And then we're going to follow that up in September with something we haven't done in a long time, and that's what we call a nursing bundle boot camp. And we're going to do that over a 2-day virtual session. And we're going to get into very specific nursing practices and not making them transactional, but transformative in the care of patients. And we'll be going over the what, why, and how of each of those practices that we recommend as a nursing bundle in that nursing excellence pursuit. So those things are coming up. And so we're just teasing them right now. All the details aren't out. The registration links aren't out. But since this is an audience that probably has a few more nurses listening, I thought I'd mention those here today. And you can go to our website, capstoneleadership.net, and sign up for our newsletter. And that's where you find out dates and all the specifics of things like that coming up. But other than that, I just want to thank you, Greg, for your time today. And you're willing to pay forward what you learned at your recent conference. And it's great when an educational event or networking event like that can help you, but then spread into other helpful things for others. So thank you for that. Anything else, Greg, as we wrap up?
I don't think so. Thank you for the opportunity to join you again. It's always a joy, and I'm looking forward to the Healthcare Executive Forum here next month.
I know. Yeah. That event, the registration just ended on Friday. And now we're into the final details of preparing for our healthcare executives that are going to be with us in Madison for that annual event, 14th annual event. My goodness, time flies. You know, I didn't mention this earlier, but our very first event that we did like this was actually called a CNO, Chief Nursing Officer retreat. And it was just for nursing officers. And that was the first couple of years that we offered this annual event. And we got feedback from them that said, you know, we learn all this stuff over here, and then we go back and we try to bring it into our organizations and our entire executive teams. And it seems like that would be much easier if they were at the event with us. And so we opened it up to a broader healthcare executive audience. And now it really is that CEOs, CFOs, CNOs, COs, et cetera. And even some middle managers show up that have their sights on executive leadership too. So yeah, I'll see you there, Greg, in person. We are a company that's remote. All of our team, including yourself, we all work remotely across the country. So this event gives us an opportunity to see each other in person too. So I'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.